It is my privilege to introduce the Reverend Dr. Aaron Bowens, who is here tonight. Aaron is a dear colleague of mine. We have been in ministry together for a few years. We have served in the same conference together, the same district together, shared district superintendents and such things, and shared many friends. Aaron is a gifted pastor. He is a gifted communicator, and he is the one that has brought this Hand to Plow program to bear fruit in the Upper New York Conference. And so I want to thank you for accepting the invitation to come to Endwell. He's a very, very busy guy, and to be able to get him for a period of time tonight is an honor and a privilege. So thank you. Would you please join your heart with mine and pray? Let us pray. Wonderful God, we give you thanks for this day. And we pray in this moment as we gather together as the body of Christ that we will be attentive and that you will keep us disciplined to the words that are shared tonight, to the thoughts. We give you thanks for the privilege of being your church, and we ask blessings to be with Aaron. We thank you for bringing him here tonight, and we pray for safe travels. We pray all of this in the one we worship, the one we praise, and in the name of our Savior Jesus. Amen. Would you help? Welcome, Aaron.
All right, well, thanks for having me, everybody. I'm going to keep checking in with the folks in the back to make sure I'm using a loud enough voice to be heard in the midst of that. So it is such a privilege to be with you all. Just yesterday, I was with our bishop, Mark Webb, and he sends his greetings. He loves to ask where I'm off to next, and so he sends greetings along to all of you in this time together. This evening we're going to talk about the Hand to Plow process, which, as it says on the screen here, is an intentional process to transform local churches. And so there's some pieces we're going to look at, some assumptions about it, where it came from, and all those kinds of things. But I thought maybe to start off, I would find out what our starting point is. So if there's any, what do you know, what do you guess, what do you hear about the Hand to Plow process in our conference? Yep.
It's a way to grow the church.
It's a way to grow the church. That has certainly been one of the benefits that many churches have found.
Other people come from other congregations come to our church to evaluate it. I believe over a 3-year period.
Yeah, there's a consultation piece that's involved with that we do. We take a pretty stem to stern look at the life of the church. We'll certainly talk about that tonight. That's not a bad starting place. That's a pretty good piece to look at. In fact, you talk about the growth of the church. Coming out soon will be the next edition of the Print Advocate from the conference. And the whole article, the whole edition is on vital congregations. And there's a couple of the congregations in there that share the stories of the impact that Hand to Plow has had. The one story that gets lifted up is Auburn EUMC. And they're experiencing a tremendous amount of growth. And they were one of our pilot churches through the process. And so we're seeing some fruit from that along the way. But I'm going to walk us through this presentation. Feel free to ask questions. Stop me at any point. Have me go back over some things. Feel free to push and challenge and push back and that kind of thing. And we're just going to walk through it, and we'll get through our time and see what we're going to do. Now, when we talk about our process, one of the things that we have to get clear is what are our assumptions. Right? I understand it's dangerous, assumption, the whole thing there, I get that. But I think it's important just to put right on the table, here are the things that we looked at when we started to put together this process. The first thing we said is we need a process and not a program. Any takers? What's the difference? Process, program.
Process is ongoing, the program has an end.
Right, the process keeps going, the program has a start time and an end time.
The process is flexible.
The process is flexible. Moves a little bit with the context, yeah. Anything else? I'm fond of saying that the only thing a program really changes is the balance in your checkbook. You spend all the money, you buy all the pieces, you get all the things, and you do it, and then afterwards you might experience a short change, but over time you return back to where you started before the program. And so the assumption that we need a process, we need something that really gets at changing the ways that we think and function as the church, and not just as a momentary thing. Not just as well, we did this for 6 months and wasn't that great. Our hope is that the Hand to Plow process really initiates an ongoing environment change in the life of the church. So that has some implications for how we designed things and how we put things together. Another assumption that we did is this will take the resource of time, energy, effort, and finances. Most of our churches that are experiencing decline or plateau didn't get there overnight. Now, we may have all had that spot where we woke up one day and realized things aren't the way they used to be. That ever happen here? Yeah. But that hasn't happened just that quickly. Over time, the resources and all these things have happened to get churches to where they're at today. Well, it's going to take that same time and effort to get out of this situation. And understanding that we've worked with churches in all kinds of settings and all kinds of situations. I think the smallest church we've worked with is a church of about 15 people to say very little resource is being polite. To churches of a couple hundred. We don't have, and I would say in our conference, we don't have large churches. Across the country, large churches start at 700-800. We don't have any that big. But we've had churches all through there, and it requires some resource. It requires some time. It requires effort. And, money. The old adage, you got to spend some to make some. It rings true in this process as well. So we worked off of that as one of our assumptions. We looked at the idea that most churches desire to be vital. Did anybody come here today thinking, I hope we talk about ways that we can slowly die? Anybody? I'm batting 1,000 on that one. I've not had anybody yet tell me, no, we're doing this so that we can slowly die and fade off into oblivion. Most churches desire to be vital and healthy, to be places where disciples of Jesus Christ are made and grown and reach out into our neighborhoods. That's where we're starting from. That's one of our assumptions. So if that's not the place that a church is at, this may not be the right thing for them. But you've all said this is something you're interested in. Mission drift is the biggest factor for decline. Any takers on what I mean by mission drift?
Mission means in this church, I think, specific outreach type of things, programs, we have a committee, missions that plan specific ways to reach out to the neighborhood.
Okay.
Both the money and resources.
Okay, so churches have specific mission work that they do and mission teams. In this case, I'm talking about the mission of the church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. From time to time, we forget that. Or maybe we don't forget it, we just kind of get off focus from that a little bit. And I think that kind of mission drift, that's what we mean when I say mission drift, is we didn't make a hard left turn away from the mission. Just over time, we got less focused on making disciples and more focused on other things. And that has ramifications for the life of the church. And so we assume that that's the root cause. It's not because there's bad people in the congregation. It's not because there have been bad pastors. It's just simply we've drifted away from remembering why we do this. Does that make sense? Okay. Another assumption. Effective leadership is key. It's attributed to a lot of people. John Maxwell is one of the people who said it. Bill Hybels is another person who has said it. The local church is the hope of the world, and it rises and falls on leadership. Understanding that that's both clergy and lay leadership. If we say that it's all about just the pastor's leadership, we're going to come up short. If we say it's all about just the lay leadership, we're going to come up short. But effective leadership and a partnership between clergy and laity is a base assumption that we're making. So those are the assumptions that we're working off of. I would give you an opportunity, if you'd like to. What are some of the assumptions you're bringing tonight? I know it's a risky question. You just met me, so you don't know if it's safe. I get that. But. Well, maybe those will surface a little bit. Before I go to the next slide and talk about the principles of hand to plow, I don't have a slide for this next piece because it's just a story that I tell. Some people wonder, where did this come from? You know, Aaron, did you just sit at your desk and just sit there and stare at a blank piece of paper until this all just magically appeared? And that's not at all how it happened. Back in 2012, this was before I was in this role, I was the pastor at Cortland First United Methodist Church, and I was loving life as the pastor at Cortland First United Methodist Church. We were a church that had doubled in size in the course of 6 years. We had gone from about 60, 65 in worship to about 135 or so, depending on the Sunday. We had gotten folks involved in mission and ministry in our community, and life was really good. And the phone call came, that fateful phone call that United Methodist pastors get. Guess what, Aaron? We'd like you to entertain a new appointment. Well, what I learned as I took this new appointment was some people have been working on something called the hand to plow process. They had put together some of the big pieces, and then July 1st of 2012, I started, and they said, now run with it and design whatever you want to design, which is a wonderful thing for me. That's how my brain works. So I spent that first summer researching, because I figured there have to be other places doing this. We're not the only people on the planet trying to figure out how to revitalize churches. And so I started studying and reading and visiting, and I visited with some friends in the Missouri Annual Conference. And they do a process called Healthy Church Initiative. And I learned all about the Healthy Church Initiative. Their director is a guy named Bob Farr. He's written several books. And I just studied and looked at that, and I learned that there are about 39 annual conferences across the country who are using a similar process as Healthy Church Initiative. And I thought, that's worth looking at. And I went and as I looked at it, I realized that it could work, but we would have to adapt it for us. Because I don't know if you noticed, this isn't Missouri. And if you haven't noticed that, let's go for a walk. And it's a different context. So we couldn't just simply take the process as it was in Missouri and chunk it down here in Upper New York. So we had to adapt it and change it. So we started doing that, and in January of 2013, we launched our first run at Hand to Plow. We had 144 congregations start out, about 120 pastors, and about 700 lay people. And I keep using the phrase about because it was kind of a porous number. Some people decided to jump in, and some people decided it really wasn't for them. I can only guess from the number of booklets I had to print, which were a lot of them. And so we started off, and we did it for a year, and we learned so many things. And we learned lots of things, and we began to adapt it and change it. We began to learn what was of most importance to us and what we could really let just kind of slide away. And so we took an entire program year to do that, and then we launched again this last fall. So we've done 2 cycles of peer learning, and we have some other things going on. So that's kind of how we got to here. It wasn't just sitting in an office coming up with it. It's a lot of research to see what happens. Talking with my colleagues around the country, there's been somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 congregations across the United Methodist Church that have done a similar kind of process. And what they're finding is about an 80% success rate in churches growing and becoming more vital. So they're still tabulating some of those pieces, but that's what we're starting to see in our area as well. The churches that have fully engaged this process are experiencing growth and health, much like they remember in their corporate history, and all that. So that's some of the background about Hand to Plow. one of the pieces that I talk a lot about in Hand to Plow, and I didn't talk about this in the assumptions, but the idea of a process versus program. A program is built around certain things that you do. You fill in the boxes, you check the boxes. A process is not quite the same. A process is built around principles, some basic understandings, some things that we have to focus on. And so I thought it would be important to share with you the principles. There's 8 principles that we use to guide our understanding of what happens in the Hand to Plow process. And so we're gonna go through them and talk a little bit about each one. The first one we've talked about a little bit, mission. This idea that we are given a mission. For over 2,000 years, the church's mission has been the same. It's been some form or shape or another of Matthew 28, 16 to 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, teaching them everything that I have taught you, teaching them to obey those things, and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And know that I am with you to the very end of the age. That's the mission of the church. Years ago, I would make money doing mission statements with churches. And isn't that what we did in corporate America? We did mission statements. And so we would do that. I don't do that anymore. If a church calls me and says, "Can you help us do a mission statement?" I said, "I can do it over the phone right now." "Really?" "Yep, but I won't even charge you." We have a mission statement. Make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That happens to be the United Methodist Church's mission statement, but I don't think it's limited to just the United Methodist Church. And it doesn't have to use those exact words, but that's the mission. And so one of our principles is to say a church has to look at its relationship to that mission. And it has to look at how that mission drives what happens in the life of the church. We also talk about leadership. Again, I mentioned this earlier. The local church is the hope of the world. It rises and falls on leadership. Leadership is a funny thing to talk about, though, because there's lots of different styles. There's lots of different understandings. And so I'm going to ask you, if you could just give a most basic definition of what leadership is. How would you define that?
You could show somebody the way to do something without criticism.
Okay, so showing somebody the way to do something absent of criticism. Okay?
And at the same time, setting an example for all the others, like living.
So some examples, setting some integrity that what you're doing is what you're saying, and your life and your actions, they match. Okay?
Helping to focus the people around them towards a mutual goal.
Okay, so some focus on that. Saying this is where we said we wanted to go. Let's keep working that way. Yeah?
Being what I call a servant leader. Don't ask anybody to do what you wouldn't do.
That's right. Servant leadership. You know, if I'm going to ask somebody to clean the toilets, I'm going to be there with my toilet brush in hand, ready to do it too. Yeah. All of these things are aspects of leadership, and all of these things are pieces that we need to pay attention to. I like to use a very simple, maybe too simplistic definition, that leadership is influence. Leadership is the ability to influence another person with your words, with your life, with your actions. And all of these things that you've talked about are certainly part of it. And leadership is one of the principles that we look at, is saying if we're going to help a church be vital and increase its vitality, there has to be some influencers and some leadership that are at work. Before I hit the next principle, I do want to mention one thing I should have mentioned at the beginning. Every congregation has a level of vitality already. Every congregation out there. Now some are fairly low and some are fairly high. And so when we talk about becoming vital, what I really mean by that is to say increasing in their vitality. Every church can do that. And so these principles help us look at that. So we talked about mission, we talked about leadership. Now we get down to the vision side of it. I'm going to ask you again. There's going to be audience participation throughout. So if you weren't uncomfortable yet, start to get a little more uncomfortable with it. So I'm going to keep asking this here. Vision. What do you think about when you hear vision?
Dream,
Dream? Yeah?
where we see ourselves in 10 years.
Okay, so where you see yourself in 10 years, that and the dreaming can go hand in hand. Yeah.
Expectations?
Some expectations to that.
Goals.
Goals, absolutely.
Touchstone you're striving for.
The touchstone and what you're striving for, what you're reaching for. Yeah. I've heard it said your vision is the picture of the preferred reality. A place that we would like to go. I also like to say that our vision is the way that this particular body of believers is living out the mission right now. So right, we've said the mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. The vision is how you all see yourselves living that out right now into the future. Right? It's what happens as you pursue that mission. And so it does require, this is what it's going to look like. And it requires we have to have concrete goals to get us there. Right? And so the mission and vision work together, but it starts when we begin to have a personal vision and then we develop a corporate vision as a congregation. So in the Hand to Plow process, we invite congregations to look at this idea of vision and why does it matter. Before I jump on, just checking in. We still tracking okay? That's good because I wasn't sure what else I was going to do. I don't sing, I don't dance, or any of that stuff. But the next piece that we look at is worship. Now, I won't make anybody do a show of hands or anything, but I think we all can say we've sat through a worship service that's been painful. Not any time recently here, I'm sure. But I can tell you, as somebody who visits churches, I've sat through some worship services that even I, the dutiful pastor, have kept going, "Whew. Wow, that was only 5 minutes." And so we have to pay attention to what happens in worship. A couple of reasons for that is, one, that's really when 80 to 90% of the church body is interacting at that point. And so when we do it poorly, we're really missing an opportunity. And there are lots of ways that people connect with churches, but new people tend to still primarily come to a church through the doors of worship. And now, 50 and 60 years ago, if they came through your doors for worship and they had an experience that they didn't like, they just went to the next church down the street. This day and age, if they choose to come through your door and they have an experience that they don't really like, they aren't going to the next church. They're going back home and said, "Well, I tried that, it didn't work." So we need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention that our world around us has changed. That if you say this in the middle of worship, I'd like everybody to get your Bibles out and turn to this page. If you have folks that are under the age of 40, if I move the table right, it'll come back. Under the age of 40, they may get their phone out. And their Bible's on their phone. And we were joking before, I could run my presentation from my iPhone. But that's also where tonight when my wife and I do our devotions, we'll use the electronics to look up what we're going to talk about. So we have to pay attention to that in our world and what that means for worship. But also we don't want to lose the essentials of worship. Right? The message of worship hasn't changed. The delivery systems we might need to look at. We also talk about preaching. It's always dangerous when the pastor's in the room, but I just have to think through it, make sure I say this the way that I mean to. Good preaching alone will not create a vital congregation. However, you cannot have a vital congregation without good preaching. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I mean, we can experience a really great preacher, and that alone will not change the equation long term. But if we have a really healthy system but a really poor preacher, that will impact the system negatively too. And so in our process, we spend some time with pastors talking about what makes up good preaching. In fact, out of that conversation, this is another piece that is not hand to plow, so I'll just mention it quickly. We do a preaching academy. It's called Illuminate Preaching Academy, helping good preachers become great preachers. And we do an intentional process with them to help them develop in that aspect of that. So we talk about preaching. Missional life. This goes back to saying, you have a mission team and the ways that we engage our community. If a church does not engage its community and the larger world for the sake of the gospel, its chances at vitality are extremely low. You could even argue they're not possible. Right? So we have to have a missional life to the life of the church. We have to have something that flows out of our faith, not just flowing into it. So we talk about what's that look like? What's that look like in our day and age? And then everybody's favorite, the E word. I thought we could just, maybe we'll just pray now and go out and do some street evangelism instead of finish the meeting. Right? I'll meet you at the place we'll start, and I'll have a really great time. But that's not something that we're excited about all the time. And some of that has to do with that. That's a word that has a lot of baggage. And sometimes we're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't use the word evangelism anymore. I'm actually a proponent that says we should use the word, and we should reclaim it to mean the people that tell the good news of Jesus Christ. The people that tell the story of what God is doing in our lives through the power and grace of Jesus. So we talk about what's that mean for churches to recapture a heart for evangelism again. In upstate New York, only about 26% of the people attended church on any given Sunday. And about 33% of people self-identify themselves as Christians. So what that tells us is there's plenty of folks out there that we can have a conversation with about the love and grace that Jesus Christ has for us all. So that's one of the principles that we talk about. And the last principle we talk about is the structure of the church. Are we structured for transformation, or are we structured to maintain a membership? I guess I've gone and said it, now I better unpack that. The good news about the United Methodist Church is that we are producing exactly what we're designed to produce. The bad news is we are producing exactly what we're designed to produce. The structure for the United Methodist Church for years has been set up as a tool to develop members. To develop people that come and they take their membership vows and they do members. And please don't hear this as being anti-member. I think that's a good thing to do. But we've done it at the expense of developing disciples that live transformed lives. And we have a system that's more supported around how do we keep members going and keep members happy, rather than how do we form disciples and have them living that discipleship out. And so we talk about what would that look like? What would that structure look like? What would it look like to structure your church for transformation, not just maintenance of what has been? And that gets into some fun conversations and all kinds of things. So those are the principles that we use that guide all the ongoing development, ongoing work that we do in Hand to Plow. Again, I'm going to keep checking in just to make sure that I haven't lost you somewhere on one of the on-ramps. Are we doing okay? Is this making sense? Notice I didn't ask if you agree yet, but I just want to make sure it's making sense in that. Because one of the downfalls I have is this is my world. And I can just get going and miss a key piece. So please make sure that if I do, check in with me so that I don't lose this. So so far we've talked about our assumptions, we've talked about where it came from, now we've talked about the principles. What is this thing? I'm so glad that you asked, because I have a picture that's kind of blurry. see if I can fix that.
It's not your eyes, really.
Our process is really, it's initiated in a 3-year piece, but again, as I said, we're hoping that it's an ongoing loop. Again, I'll say oftentimes programs are linear. You do steps 1 through, and once you fill in all the boxes, you throw a party and it's over. The process is this circular piece, and it starts up at the top there, which I'm guessing some folks can't even close to see because it's hard for me to see standing here. But it's about peer learning groups. Peer learning groups. And subsequent slides break this down a little bit more, but we have this peer learning, and one of the ideas here is that congregations that are becoming more vital are in continuous learning. That we're continuously learning, not just, well, you know, we have the pastor and we have some staff and we send them off to learn. No, that together as a congregation we continue to learn and grow about our faith, about leadership, about those components that we talked about, the principles, in a regular learning cycle, whether it be reading, watching videos, having speakers, attending events, lots of different ways to do that. So that there's this continuous peer learning taking place. I will say a few words about peer learning. We intentionally chose that style of development. Because for years in the church, what did we do? Well, we said, read this book, and that'll do it. Or we said, go off to this conference, and that'll do it. And people will go off to the conference, take copious notes, and think, when I get back home, we are really going to do this. And then get back home, and nothing changes. The energy goes away, and all. So we said, peer learning is, yes, we're going to learn some content, but then we're going to sit together with colleagues and talk about what's this mean and how do we begin to apply it to really break down the learning. Any educators in the room? It's okay, I'm not going to like make you talk or anything like that. But it was really an educational choice of why we did that. Is because one of the things that we've learned, and maybe you can validate this with me, is especially in adult learning, I think it's at all ages, but especially in adult learning, that kind of peer interaction helps develop and cement learning better than just simply engaging content. And so we chose that style of learning. We think that should happen in churches, not just at a conference level. Is learning together about these principles. So we did peer learning, and then we talk about a consultation. Having somebody from outside come in and look. Again, in the following slides, I'm going to break each of these down a little bit more, but I just want to give you the big picture of the cycle. After the consultation weekend, well, the weekend is kind of the culmination. It's a several-month process. After the consultation, a congregation gets a discernment period, usually about 30 days, to discern whether they're going to accept the consultation report or not. And at the end of the 30-ish days, there's an official church conference, business meeting of the church, to vote yes or no. We don't take amendments, we don't take additions, it's a simple yes, no, up or down. And then after that, if the congregation says, we accept this report, you have an 18-month ministry plan in your hands. I happen to bring a copy of one with me. We just did this last weekend at Farmington United Methodist Church up near Rochester. They are in their discernment period. If they choose to take it on, this becomes their 18-month ministry plan. Here are the things that they're going to work on during that time. During that 18-month ministry plan in our process, we assign a coach to walk alongside the congregation as they're implementing the plan. Anybody ever hear of Bill Easom? He was a church consultant. He's still doing work, but church consultant, and they would do a really nice 3-ring binder, and it would sit on a shelf like nobody's business. And we think part of the reason that that would happen is because there was no one to walk alongside the congregation to help implement it. And so we assign a coach to help with that follow-through and help with that action steps in the midst of that. And then after that 18 months, we help do an evaluation. Is the church more vital than it was when it started the process? That's always the nervous question for the guy who's designing the process, right? But what's the point of doing it if it doesn't help us get there?
How do you measure that?
How have we measured that? We've measured that in a couple key ways. One, we look at average worship attendance. We look at missional engagement, meaning do you have more people in hands-on mission and ministry as a percentage than you did before you started. We use some less technical measures in terms of narrative. We do a lot of listening to the churches on both sides to hear what the life of the church is like. It's not uncommon on the front side for the churches to have some level of passive-aggressive conflict, for the churches to have little cliques and groups and things like that. On the other side of it, those tend to be significantly decreased. And those are things that statistics don't tell you all the time. We find that churches that are becoming more vital are churches that have more small groups, that have more engagement with children and youth. They are more missionally involved locally, regionally, and internationally. So there's some hard statistics we look at, and there's some narrative we look at.
Thank you.
And then after that evaluation, the congregation develops a new 18-month plan. It used to be we would do 10-year plans. And that worked great in the 40s and 50s. But our world changes faster than that. And so for a while we did 3 to 5 year plans. And I think that's even too long. So we do an 18-month plan. And one of my goals in this process is to get congregations to regularly be in this loop of an 18-month planning cycle that involves this whole piece where you learn together, you get some consultation. Now, it may not always be a full-blown weekend. It may just be, let's invite somebody who's not as familiar with the church to come and ask us some questions and look at some things to see what we're not seeing. Anybody ever have that happen in your house where you moved in or you see something that you know has to change but you don't have time? And over time you stop seeing it anymore? It's still there, but you don't see it? That's what happens in our churches too. And so having that outside person take a look is really helpful. And then still going through that discernment process. I always recommend that the 18-month plan get voted in place by a charge conference. So that it's an official action of the life of the church. So when somebody says, well, why are we doing this? We can say, we agreed together on this date at this meeting to do this. So it just helps reinforce why we do it. So that's the 3-phase, the cycle process that we look at. Peer learning being one phase, consultation being another, and then the implementation and rebirthing of a new plan being the third in our process. So I'm going to take a few moments and break down each one a little bit more. Phase 1, this is our peer learning groups. Your pastor is facilitating a peer learning group for us right now up at Castle Camp and Retreat Center. For the clergy, there are 9 sessions scheduled through the year. At their first session, they schedule the rest of their year because they're in no way I'm scheduling that many clergy schedules. And so they all sit down, they bring their calendar, and they schedule out the year. It's usually 8 to 10 people in the peer group, and they have a set curriculum that they read through in the year. There's a book that's connected with 8 of the 9 sessions. The very first session doesn't have a book connected with it because it's an overview. I sit down and basically do a version of this presentation. And then they read the books and meet together and unpack it and discuss it and talk about the different pieces. Also a part of that time is personal spiritual life development. Each group has some time that they spend asking some classic Wesleyan questions. How is it with your soul? How is it between you and Christ? How's your relationship going? Are you taking time to pray? Are you taking time for your scriptures? Are you taking time to take time off? I always don't like it when I get asked that question. But we have folks that ask that. So that happens throughout the year, and then we invite laity to participate in 5 sessions. Again, 4 of the 5 have a book that's connected with it, but it's more content driven than just a book study. The first session is that same orientation. I come and share a similar version of this, but a little bit more targeted at what happens in the peer groups. And then the laity sessions, we schedule those all at once. So we don't get together and try to juggle, because usually we have 60 to 80 people at the lay sessions. Could you imagine calendaring that? Right now, actually, I just got word today from our Camp and Retreat Ministries. So that's where we host all of our events, is at our Camp and Retreat Ministries. That our dates for next year are finalized. So in the next couple weeks, we'll have those dates to go public with some nice write-up about when are the lay sessions happening. It's between September and back all the way around to May. So we spread them out. We try to take off time around Easter and those kinds of things. I try my best to pay attention to school schedules, but not everybody across New York State has the same weeks off and all that kind of thing. So we work within that. So those are the sessions there. There's a preference given for clergy and lay teams from the congregation, meaning that we want it to be both. We say that it's a dynamic partnership between clergy and laity, and so our preference is that we don't have just the pastor doing it, or that we don't have just a group of lay people doing it. We've had both in our journey. We've had times when it's been just the pastor, and we've had times when it's been just a group of lay people. That's harder for our process, because our process is designed around doing that together. So that when the week shows up, usually the second session for both the clergy and the laity, within a couple weeks you have read the same book and you've discussed the same content at the meeting. The ideal is you'll get together at your local congregation to talk about what you're both learning and what that means for this place, so that learning continues to deepen and further as we go. So that's why we prefer that to be a team. However, we realize that doesn't happen. Sometimes there are clergy with a capacity in a limiting appointment. Isn't that just some wonderful ecclesial language? You might be looking at it going, what in the world is that? There are some of our clergy that are in appointments that they're growing past that appointment. Or we may be training a clergy person now for the appointment they may have later. Now, there's another side to this. As I mentioned, we've had laity who have done this without a pastor. We've had laity say, we really want to do this. And we've had pastors who've said, look, I'm quarter time. I work 2 other jobs. I can't add this in. Well, we have a conversation with the superintendent. We say, we don't want to limit where these lay folks can go. We don't want to dishonor this person who's working 2 jobs and providing wonderful leadership for the congregation. So let's let the lay folks come on board. So we prefer teams, but it's not a hard and fast, but we do it on a case-by-case basis. I have a conversation with the district superintendent of that congregation just to make sure that we're clear. I don't know as if we've had any clergy outright refuse to say, I know my lay people want to do this, but I don't have any interest. That's a whole different conversation that I thankfully don't get to have. So that's part of phase 1. And then after phase 1, it says year 2 continuance there. It's not assumed that everybody that does peer learning will automatically do a consultation. Our first time around, I mentioned we had about 140 congregations. We had 11 congregations do a consultation out of that 144, or 147. And I was ecstatic. I thought it was great. Some of the churches said, we might do that in the future, but we're not ready yet. And I applauded that recognition because they were right. So we also said, well, what do you do if you finished a year of peer learning and you're not ready for the consultation, but you want to keep developing? Well, we have a continuance that we've put into place. We call it a continuation group. And the continuation group is, again, peer learning. It's for any congregation that have completed phase 1. I mean, once you go through the first year of peer learning, we don't make you go back and do that again. We do the whole thing. It's not ready for consultation yet. but want to keep learning, want to keep growing in what's happening. Same setup. This is a change. We made this change this year. We used to do a fewer number for clergy and laity, and what we heard from folks was, why? Let's just keep it the same. And so that's what we've done. 9 clergy sessions and 5 lay sessions. In our planning, what we did was we matched up for the laity. Whether you're in year 1 or in continuation, you meet at the same time at the same place. And that's pretty intentional, so that there can be greater conversation as folks go through the process. But again, it's this journey through. I hesitate to say this because you'll all start flipping there. The last page of the handout that you have shows the curriculum for 2015-16 of what the topics are and what the resource material is for both the year 1 and the continuation. So we wanted to be able to build that in and say we can keep doing that. And my commitment is, as long as we have people that want to do peer learning, we'll keep designing additional peer learning modules. Because I'm such a big believer in peer learning that I think if congregations did nothing else, just peer learning, that would help increase their vitality.
Are there minimums and maximums for peer learning?
Numbers? Generally, we like to see at least 5 to 7 lay people, depending on the size of the church. I mean, if it's a church of 25, we're happy to get 3 lay people. If it's a church of 150 to 200, 5 to 7, we don't limit it. We've had a couple churches that have brought 10, 12 folks. We don't set an upper limit. When we do the application process for the consultation, we ask who's been involved. And say if it's a church of 150 and we look and it's been the pastor and 1 layperson, that weighs in our decision making. Because all the principles of that first year get played out in the journey of the consultation. So if only 2 people have engaged that journey, we get a little nervous about how effective that's going to be. But in terms of minimum, like I said, 5 is really great. There is no upper end maximum. All right, before I move to phase 2, questions? Yep.
In the laity sessions, it's not just our laity from our church.
Right. We try to do it regionally, and so I think right now it's 8 different congregations that are bringing laity together at Castle Wasco. We always designed one to be here at Sky Lake, which is much more convenient for you all. We just didn't get enough congregations to sign up because peer learning requires peers. And so we could make that work. But usually it's 8 to 10 congregations. Their pastors are doing the clergy session together and then the laity journey together. Yep.
How long are the sessions?
Generally, they start at 10 and get over at 4. And I've said, we train our folks that what your start time is, you start, and 4 o'clock is no later than. I think we have a group that meets out in Finley Lake, way out near Jamestown. They are early risers. They start at 9:30. But that was a group decision. And we like to do them right at our camp and retreat facilities because they do all the welcoming hospitality. They take care of lunch. Everything's taken care of right there. And nobody's asked, but I'm sure it's important for me to communicate. We do a minimal cost to the congregation, and I really emphasize the minimal. I think last year for phase 1, we did $150, and that covered all the clergy sessions and all the lay sessions, no matter how many laity you brought. And that's the full day at the site with lunch and coffee and treats and all kinds of things you shouldn't eat and all that kind of stuff. So we feel like it's fairly economical. We subsidize that through the conference to cover the cost of it. The Camp and Retreat Ministries cut us a deal because we have so many people that do it, but they have a cost, and we pay that cost too. So we do $150 per congregation just as a way to make it sustainable long term. Yep.
What is the process if the church feels after they've done phase one that they're not ready for consultation? Is this like a vote, or do peers get together with the lady and the pastor, or how is that decided?
Usually, I encourage it to be a decision that is done corporately. We have had times when the pastor has made the decision, and when I've had lay people from that church say, well, how come we didn't apply? You're asking the wrong person. And so it was clear that it wasn't a corporate decision. Always encourage, everything we talk about at Hand to Plow is we want this partnership between clergy and laity. And so we would want that group of people to sit down and say, gosh, is this really something we want to do? Midstream of the curriculum, there's conversation about the consultation. There's a whole little write-up that goes right into the guidebook and all those things. So that there can be an informed decision, but it's always best if it's done. You know, it may be even take an evening such as this with this group and say, okay, here's what we're learning and here's where we're at. And now we have the information of what it would look like to do a consultation. Are we ready for that? And if I've had congregations not sure, I'll come and spend an evening with you and help you discern that. Because we have a keen interest in making sure that we're doing a consultation in the right places. Because quite frankly, it's a stewardship piece. It's not cheap. And you'll see why in just a second of what that looks like. So it's always better if it's corporate. Other questions? All right, let's take a look at that phase. Phase 2. This is our consultation phase, consultation weekend. What will happen, and actually this year we got them out a little bit early, usually about April or May, applications for a consultation go out to everybody who's completed phase 1 or in the process of completing phase 1. It's a 6 or 8 page application where we ask them some about the history of the church, what's happening. We want to know who's been at the sessions and things like that. And that gets sent into the district superintendent's office, and then that goes to my office. From there, I do the first kind of walk through and sort through and see what's there, and then I sit with the entire cabinet. And the cabinet starts to help me walk through it. One of the things that we talk about is when we look at the application is we're targeting high-capacity congregations. So what is a high-capacity congregation? A high-capacity congregation is one that shows some of the markers already. They have enough resourcing around, both human and fiscal, to actually implement some changes. That there's not a high level of conflict. That doesn't mean there's no conflict, but there's not a high level of conflict. We look to see, are there some of these processes in place? You know, is there an intentional way of helping to form disciples? Is there a place, some of the churches that have applied, they're in a geography where people used to live, and it doesn't really matter how much resourcing we pour into that, there's a cap to that capacity. And so we weigh all those kinds of things in when we make our decision about how that happens. Once we decide who's we're going to extend the consultation to, we send out an invitation. We don't just assume because you applied that you're automatically going to do it, so we invite you to do that. Upon that invitation, the first thing that happens is we gather all the pastors together. This year, I've already scheduled this year's, it's in November. We do an overnight that we get all the pastors together. I bring in a few of the pastors who have gone through the consultation. I bring in a few of the coaches, and we talk about what's this journey really like. And I also talk about some of the nuts and bolts of what needs to happen. There's some pre-work that happens. There's some surveys, some assessments, all this kind of stuff that we put together. I forgot to bring it with me, but it usually is about 1.5 inch binder that we put together on every single church we do a consultation at. It has history, it has community makeup, we look at the financials, we look at statistics, all kinds of different things. We do some assessments of the pastor, we do some assessment of the whole congregation. We pull all that together, so we sit down with the pastors to help them understand what's about to happen in the life of their congregations. This is no small little thing that happens. This is a big deal. And so we just like to make sure that that's clear at the outset. We're also hoping that by this point, there's a really good working relationship between the pastoral leadership and the laity of the church. So that's why we just get the pastors together, because they're going to bring it back and filter that through. So, I mentioned all the pre-work. There's a bunch of it, because our role when we do a consultation is we have to learn about it. We have to learn everything that we can, and we can't do that just over 3 days of a weekend. And so we just get all that information. We don't really want to make many assumptions about life. Like if we were coming to Endwell, we wouldn't want to make assumptions about what life at Endwell UMC is like. We are dependent on that pre-work. So we've had some pre-work that's better than others. That impacts our ability to do a good consultation. So we have a lot of that pre-work that we do. When we get to the actual weekend, a consultation weekend, we bring a team, and please note it says it could include. It will always include a lead consultant. Somebody who we've trained, somebody who's sat in on several consultations, so that if it, right now I'm the primary lead consultant, but that's not sustainable. So we're training up more folks that can do that. It will include on Saturday of the weekend, the district superintendent joins the team. They're not there for Friday, and I'll explain why in just a moment. There also, a lot of times we have the person that could be or would be assigned as the coach. We have them come for the weekend so they can begin to get to know what's happening in the life of the congregation. Just completed a consultation in Farmington where we had a little bit larger team. We had 2 extra consultants with us. And some of that was to continue to train some people, but also it's a church of about 200. And so we needed a little bit larger team so we could collect more data and give more perspectives. So that's kind of what the team looks like, and it ebbs and flows a little bit depending. I leave tomorrow to go to Orchard Park, and we are doing consultation in Orchard Park, which is a church of about 50 to 60. So if we bring a team of 6, it's a little overwhelming. So we'll be a smaller team doing that. So what happens on the weekend? We've got all your pre-work. We come into town on a Thursday. And as a congregation, you have no responsibilities on Thursday. What we do is we start at the church and we visit the closest places we can find, businesses, gas station. And we do the unspeakable thing of we ask, what can you tell us about such and such United Methodist Church? And we learn all kinds of amazing things. One of the places we visited, I said, what can you tell me about such and such United Methodist Church? And the person looked at me and said, I didn't even know we had a Methodist church. The irony was it was 2 doors away. So we do that kind of learning. We explore the area. If it's, like this time of year, on a Thursday, I would get here probably between 4 and 5. So I can watch and see the ebb and flow of people coming home from work time. I can drive around. I can put my speakers on and walk around the neighborhood and listen to the sounds and hear what's happening and things like that. We try to learn as much as we can. Then Friday morning, we begin a series of interviews. We do a one-on-one interview with the senior pastor, and it's an hour-and-a-half interview, and we ask about all kinds of things. If there's staff, we ask about staff management, and we ask about leadership, we ask about faith development, leadership development, how do you welcome newcomers, stem to stern. After the interview with the pastor, we begin a series of 8 one-on-one interviews that are half an hour on and 15 minutes off. And we take a break for lunch, but that goes all the way up till 5 o'clock. And we ask the congregation to determine who we interview. There's always a controversy over who gets interviewed and who doesn't. What I tell folks as the consultant, everything teaches us something. Even the names of those who are selected to be interviewed. Teach us something. And so after we do that, we then take the pastor, and if they have a spouse, we take the pastor and the spouse out to dinner somewhere of their choosing to have a chance to have a conversation with their spouse. We then come back to the church and we have a focus group where it's everybody in the church is welcome to come. Like I said, last week at the church we were at, we had almost 80 people come to the focus group. So we split up into 3 smaller groups, and we have some set questions that we ask, and we give everybody a chance to give input onto them. Because we're just trying to learn. We're trying to hear what people's experience of the life of the church is. At the focus group, I'm always really clear. We don't get to respond to somebody else's statement. We don't have to defend our own statement. We just simply get to share. Because our experience is our experience. I think only once did I come close to excusing somebody from a focus group because they couldn't keep control of their reactions. If somebody said something that they disagreed with, you had the... Can't do that because we need a safe place for people to feel like they can share what's going on. So we send everybody home after an hour and a half. Usually we start the focus group at 7, we end at 8:30, send everybody home. Then the consultation team, usually back at the hotel, gets together and we start debriefing the day. What did you hear? What are the strengths that you heard in the church? What are some of the concerns that you have? And we have that whole conversation, and every concern that we raise, we come up with, well, what's a recommendation we can make to address that concern? And then the lead consultant sends the rest of the team to bed, and they get out their computer, and they write the first rough draft of a report. This is one of those adaptations that we learned from other places. They wait until Saturday to start writing drafts. We said, no. We're going to start Friday night. And it's always important for me to say, it's an extremely rough draft. Last week we had some things in our rough draft that we took out and put different things in because of what we did Saturday. But we also know that if we wait until Saturday, we lose a lot of great stuff from Friday because there's a lot of information coming. So we write that draft, and then we get back together Saturday morning. Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, we meet with leadership team, church council, whatever you call it in that particular church, administrative board. And I like to call that the I'm confused session. Undoubtedly on Friday, we will hear things as a consultation team that have utterly confused us. One congregation we worked with, we asked the question, how does somebody go from sitting in the pew to being active in the life of ministry of the church? And throughout the day on Friday, we've got 10 different answers. So I sat with that team and I said, I need your help, I'm a little confused. We asked this question and we heard a range of answers. How does this happen here? And then the administrative council spent a half hour arguing with each other about how that happened. I was training somebody to be a consultant and they said, how come you're not stopping them? I just looked over and said, how come you're not taking notes? We were learning all kinds of great stuff. So that's what that session is. We want to clear up because we want to minimize the number of assumptions we're making. And so we get those clarity, help us understand. I always ask the question, what's a deal breaker? At the end of Sunday, we're going to give you a report. What would it, if it showed up in that report, cause you to not read the rest of it? I always give a caveat with that as well. That doesn't mean we're not going to put it in there. We just want to be fully aware of what we're doing. And so we have that time. That goes till 10 o'clock. At 10:15, we have another whole congregation interaction that we do a little bit more listening and we do a little bit of teaching on the principles of healthy congregations and some of the pieces that help inform what we're doing. That's also a time as the lead consultant, I try to test out a few things that we think may show up in the report. And, to see if I press on this, does everybody start coming at me with, whips and chains and all that kind of thing? Perhaps we want to rephrase that, that kind of thing. Or we test it out and people kind of look at me like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And we unpack that a little bit. So that if it does show up in the report, it's not completely foreign. So that ends at 2:30 on Saturday. We send everybody else home. And thank you for your time. Send you away. The team then sits down and finalizes the report. And then later that afternoon, we sit down with the senior pastor and we walk line by line through the report. And the main question that we're looking at to have answered, two main questions, is one, does this make sense? And two, do you think you can provide leadership to this? Notice what question we didn't ask. Do you agree? That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, does it make sense? And we've had times when they've said, no, I don't even understand where you're getting that from. And so we can unpack, well, here's what we heard. Now, we don't give names, like the interviews, we tell folks they're anonymous but not confidential. You know, we're not going to say, well, Fred said this. We heard from somebody this, and we've actually, a lot of times, if it shows up in the report, chances are we've heard from 8 to 10 people this. And so then we chase it through. So that's why we ask, does it make sense? But then, can you provide leadership? Because if the senior pastor doesn't feel like they can provide leadership, it's going to be a really big uphill battle. But once the pastor says, yep, we can do this, the report is then final. We give them a digital copy of it, and their job is that evening to make copies and have it ready for Sunday, but nobody gets an advance copy. We give out the copies all at the same time because we just feel like somebody comes to church early the next morning and they get a hold of that copy at 7:30 and the service doesn't start till 9. By 9 o'clock you couldn't believe the stories that are created about this that has no context. Or, well, how come they know and I don't know? So on Sunday morning, the lead consultant will be the preacher at any and all worship services. And then we ask you to have a congregational meeting where the lead consultant will read through the report and walk the congregation through it. I heads up this every time I can. After the consultant reads the report, they will not take questions. Because once we start asking questions, we're already in discernment road, and especially Sunday, before we've had a chance to even receive it all and let it sink in. So we don't do any questions at that point. And I will confess, that's really hard for me. Because as you've already experienced tonight, I like to stop and ask, are there questions? I don't do that. We give you the report. Usually if I'm doing it well, within 5 minutes, I'm out the door. And you have that report to sit with. And then enters into the next phase. But before we talk about the discernment, did everybody track that? Did I lose anybody? Again, our goal as the consulting team is to learn as much as we can about you all and about what life is like here. And oftentimes it's a matter of holding up a mirror. The most common way that we know we've done a good job as a consulting team is if when we give the report, the most common response is, finally somebody named that. Rarely are people surprised by what's in the report. Well, we've had some people get a little upset because I can't believe you named that. We've existed for 50 years in dysfunction with nobody naming that, and now you've named it and we're going to have to do something with it. But that's part of that process. We really do not come in with a lot of assumptions about what life is like. We work really hard to learn that from you as we go. Our expertise is not in this place. Our expertise is in a process and the principles that create healthy and vital congregations. The consultation is trying to bring those two things together. Your expertise here and our expertise in that process. So after the consultation, you'll have the report. You begin a 30 days of prayer and listening. Please note, this isn't a time of going, well, I don't know if I like the report or not. That's not the question. The question is this the next faithful step that God has for us? And there's been some courageous people along the way who've said, I don't really like the report, but I know this is what we need to do. I'm a little anxious that this may not be the church I'm used to if we do this, but I know that God is calling us to do this. That's courage, that's faithfulness. We give 30 days to think about that, pray about that, to have conversations. We ask the congregations to set up 3 town hall style meetings. You get everybody in the same room and you start talking your way through it. You ask the questions. If there are questions that you all can't, through conversations, sort out, you email me. Even if I wasn't at the consultation, you email me and I'll either talk to the consultant or I meet with the consultants afterwards so that I'm prepared for that conversation. But you do 3 of those throughout that 30 days to listen, to talk, to pray, to engage in that. And then the prescriptions or recommendations are accepted at a church conference. Church conference is what again?
Charge.
It's very similar to the charge conference, yes. It's a step beyond. The charge conference is basically the administrative board. The church conference is every professing member gets voice and vote. So it's as close to a congregational meeting as we get in United Methodist. Everybody gets a voice, but those that are professing members, everybody gets a vote. And we very intentionally say it is a church conference because we want as many folks weighing in on this decision because it's a big decision. And it's a simple, it usually only takes about 10 minutes. It takes longer to get everybody in the room and quiet usually than it does to vote. And it's usually, we do it on a written ballot. Yes, I support the report. No, we don't. And then it's a simple majority. And as long as there's a simple majority, we move forward. Now, again, it tells us something. If 60 people show up and it passes 31 to 29, that's information we pass along to the coach because their job is going to be fun. We've had one congregation in the journey they had 26 people vote. It was 13 to 13, which is not a majority. So they did not accept the report. All the other congregations have had an overwhelming majority, if not unanimous votes of yes. So we go through that process and you get to vote on that. Now the question comes up, and maybe you have it already. Well, what happened to that congregation that voted no? And if you didn't have it, you do now, because I just asked it. The report is still theirs. The difference is the way we resource it afterwards. The congregation that says, yes, we'll support that one, we assign the coach. And as an annual conference, we pay the coach. Now we invite the congregation if they want to help offset that cost, we would appreciate that. We pay the coach $100 a month. And we do that whether the congregation can or not because we want quality help. Congregation that votes no, they're still welcome to get a coach, we're just not paying for it. Oftentimes there's recommendation of different workshops and different trainings to do. If you're a Hand to Plow congregation that has said yes to the report, we take care of the cost of making that happen. Any honorariums or travel or any of that, we take care of that. Now if you say no, you still have the report, you want to do it, that's your dime. And sometimes it's, that's the joy of a connectional church. You can talk to some of the folks that do things that we've trained to do these, and they'll say, yeah, I'll be happy to come and do it. Sometimes they'll say, I'll be happy to come and do it if you pay for my mileage. Yeah, I'll be happy to come and do it if you pay for my mileage and we can work out an honorarium. But if you vote yes, we take care of that. So essentially, I don't want to do a shell game. If you say yes, we jump on board and walk alongside you pretty closely. If you say no, we take our toys and go home. And I just don't want to hide that. But part of that's because the consultation weekend is a pretty significant investment of resource. We do ask congregations to offset the cost on a sliding scale. It's anywhere from $1,000 to $1,900 depending on the average worship attendance of the church. We can now say this now that we're this far into doing consultations. It costs us anywhere between $7,000 and $10,000 to do the consultation, depending on the size of the team and all that kind of thing. Because there's hotel rooms, there's travel. We do pay our consultants. I don't think we pay them enough, but it's what we can. We pay them what we can. All the different pieces. There's assessments that the pastor does that we pay for. There's the congregational assessment. It's called a Readiness 360. We pay for that as part of that. So all these expenses, the time of my travel, usually about 2 weeks before the consultation, I come and do a workshop. All those kinds of things factor into that cost. And so we do the sliding scale there to just try to make it somewhat sustainable so that we can have that available in more places. I will tell you personally, if I get invited to be a consultant outside of our conference, it's going to cost you more than $2,000. Generally for me, it's about $1,000 a day. And I don't say that for me, I just say so you understand the cost that we're looking at there. So that's the discernment period. You vote yes, we jump in and we support that in any way that we can. The congregations that are in the implementation phase, we're going to shoot for, this last time we did it twice, to get all the pastors together to talk about how it's going, and what we heard from them is we need to do that more often. And so we're going to try to schedule more times to get the pastors together to unpack a little bit, talk about what's happening. So that's that phase of it. Then we get into some evaluation. As we get to the backside of the report, we want to know, did it work? Did it make a difference? What did we learn to know? So we do an evaluation of the ministry plan. We do an evaluation of the process. We continually evaluate our hand-to-plow process. That's why it's changed some over 3 years. Because we learned, oh, that doesn't work as well as we thought it was. And then we learned, oh, there's something that'll work better. So every step of the way, we want to be adaptive in our process, and we want to continue to learn. And we rework it. Same thing with a church's ministry plan. You might finish the 18 months and realize, no, that was the right thing. We just tried the wrong way of going about it. So let's rework it and try again. Let's try again with our learning in place. And then you do a new ministry plan. We build into every one of our reports, and you can see it in the copy that I have here. At the 17-month mark, we do a workshop at the church of how do you write your own 18-month ministry plan so that it continues that cycle and reworking that plan. And then you do a new cycle of peer learning. It may not be going away to the camps. It may just be something you do in-house or talking to a neighbor church so that you can get some other folks involved, but to continue to peer learn, to continue to grow and to develop into that. Checking in. Are we still doing okay? Still have everybody with me? Are there questions? Yep.
Do you ever do a second consultation if you get to a certain amount of it and the church wants you to come back and do that observation again? I mean, do you ever do that again?
We would. We haven't reached that point yet where we have a church that far through. My recommendation is to say 18 months out, we'll teach the church to do their own plan, and then so the next 18 months, my recommendation is to do just a one-day. So we'll send somebody to talk with a few folks and observe some things and check in.
See if they're hearing different.
Right. And then after another 18-month cycle, then consider bringing in somebody else for a more full evaluation at that point. So 3.5 years out. Now, if the first time around, first 18 months, you look back and say, well, we are a completely different place than we were when we did this, there's a lot of value to that. I would say from a financial side, we probably wouldn't fund it the same way. But there may be value of saying, we've changed so much, we're not even sure where to go for our next 18 months. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So we're hoping that cycle, that outside consultation becomes a regular part of the life of the church. So that somebody from outside on a pretty regular basis can come in and take a look. One of the training pieces we're trying to organize is mystery worshipers. Folks that we will deploy over the course of 3 months or so to have 10 or 12 of them visit a congregation with a pretty standard, here's what we're looking for, and then we'll generate a report that we will give to the church and say, here's what our mystery worshipers found. Because I'm just going to guess here, this is a friendly congregation. Wow, that's good. There's some truth there. There's a couple people going, I've never been to the second friendliest congregation in town. When we send in mystery worshipers, we can find out if that's true or not. We can find out some of the things that we may hold near and dear that are a complete disconnect to somebody who's not a part of the system. And then it's not just about, well, I think. It's, we have hard data. Someone who's not one of us was here. Oh, and we had 12 of them, and 10 of the 12 mentioned this was a real disconnect. We have to think about that. It doesn't mean automatically we do away with that. Like if 10 of the 12 come in and say, they just kept talking about this Jesus guy, and that really turned me off.
We miss your worshipers.
If I get a church that changes that, we have a whole different discussion to have. I'm not sure consultation can help at that point. But so that ongoing way of having folks take a look, I think, is always healthy. Always. Pastoring the church, I always found ways to invite friends to come that people wouldn't know. Like I would know, I was pastoring in Cortland, I'd invite somebody to come from Rochester and say, just don't tell anybody you know me, just come and check the place out and tell me what you think. I'd take them out to lunch afterwards, just to get some feedback. Yeah. Other questions? All right, we're almost there. We're on the home stretch. When we talk about a ministry plan, it's important to understand what's in there. Training will be provided. We're ongoing in our training of how to help create a ministry plan. Early on in ministry, I just thought this was normal. In fact, my superintendent asked me, well, when we get together for your annual, I want to see your ministry plan. No problem. I wrote a ministry plan, and she was surprised when I actually showed up with a ministry plan. And what I've learned is we talk about having them, but we don't teach people how to do it. And so we'll provide the training on how to continue to do a ministry plan. It's outcome based. We don't want to have a ministry plan that is all flowery and we can't measure it. So that it has to be, if we're going to do this, this is what we're expecting to happen out of it. I'll use the example of we want this church to get deeper in their relationships, relational depth. Well, the outcome is, if this is successful, people will report that there are deeper interpersonal relationships, if you ask them. So that's what we mean by outcome based. Some of it, one church, we wrote a recommendation that said, if you do this, that you will end up with 66% of your resources of time and finances will be spent outside the walls of the congregation. So that outcome had some very clear numbers to it, and we could sit down and we showed them where they were currently at, very low number, and to where they were going to get. So it has to be outcome based. It has to have vision. It has to be about going somewhere other than where we currently are. That preferred reality. Time specific. Again, I keep referencing this. I hope that you will take a few moments to take a look at it. Every recommendation we make has a very specific set of time. It usually starts off with the pastor in consultation with the coach forming a team, and we say the team has to be formed by this date. And then this is the work they're going to do, and they're going to make a report by this date, and you're going to implement some changes by this date, and you're going to evaluate the changes by this date. Very time specific. In our report from the consultation, nothing is more than 18 months out. So there's a lot of things happening, but it's very time specific in that. Anybody ever have that experience where you set some really great goals, but you don't say when you're going to get it done? Right? Doesn't it get really easy to say, well, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Measurable. We talked about that. You got to know what the success rate looks like. If we set our goals and we set our ministry plan so it's just kind of there, we can say, great, we did it. We did a bunch of things and then we drew the bullseye and we hit it. Right? So it's measurable from the outset, and that there's accountability. What happens if we don't do it? So there's some internal accountability. That's also why we give the coach. The coach is going to be the one asking, okay, you had these deadlines, how'd you do? Well, we didn't really get there. Okay, why not? Well, we were just getting ready to work on it, and we had 27 funerals and 5 weddings, and the roof fell in. That's a really good reason to not get there. The reason, well, we just didn't feel like it. I've empowered our coaches at that point to say, that's funny, I just don't feel like doing this anymore. The accountability is we'll provide the coach as long as the congregation continues to engage. If they don't continue to engage, we don't continue to provide the resources. Some accountability in the midst of that. that there's also some resources we have to think through. That's why we collect the financials from the church. We don't want to make a recommendation that's not financially feasible. We had one church that needed to rework their whole worship area. That was what they told us they wanted to do. They just wanted to get it in writing. And we asked a crazy question. Well, how much money do you have to do that? They said, we never thought about that.
Okay.
Well, if we write you a recommendation that there's not the resources to do, it doesn't matter how good your accountability is. If you can't do it, you can't do it. So it has to take into account the resources, and it has to have some continuation. So I always build into the plan, and this is the date that we will do the next plan. So that we're constantly doing that. So we don't just sit there and say, well, we did that 18 months, it was great. We'll just sit back and bask in the glory of that. You want to take time to celebrate it, but you want to have the next plan to go on to. And that's the long, boring, drawn-out piece of hand to plow of what we do. You can find on the last page there, that's the upcoming 2015-2016 curriculum that we'll be using. I realized that I left them all at my Syracuse office for the peer learning groups. We give you a really nice spiral-bound notebook that has notes and everything from the reading and places to interact and work with that match the curriculum through. With that. So I think that's the formal presentation I have, but certainly, what questions do you have? What information do you need? What did you need to find out that you haven't yet?
Besides yourself, you've given us a talk about who you are and all that. What do you look for in your coaches? Where do they come from? What kind of background?
Yeah. We do two things with our coaches. One, we want to find pastors. So far, they've been predominantly pastors. We are wide open to lay folks as well that have experience in vital congregations. So if it's a pastor or a layperson that has spent their life in declining churches, plateaued churches, we're going to be pretty hesitant to have them coach. We also, we just did this, we just trained 19 people as professional coaches. International Coaching Federation. I always think Star Trek whenever I hear that, but it's a true international organization that has a code of ethics and principles of coaching. We just trained 19 folks, and we're going to be deploying some of those as coaches. They may not have quite the same background and vitality of churches, but their coaching training helps compensate for that. Other questions? Yep.
So, I'm not sure how to ask this, but I look at this as, cynically, I would look at this and say, okay, we need 6, 10 people who are the go-getters. The energetic people who are going to see this through. What can you say to discredit that thought? You wouldn't want it to be that, okay, if we don't have this energetic group that's leading everybody through this, then it's not going to succeed. Will coaches be the ones who can really bring it all together, or I don't know if you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah, absolutely see where you're at. You do want to have your go-getters, your influencers involved. Ultimately, you have to turn, I say it's about 10%. Malcolm Gladwell in his book Tipping Point talks about that. I think in churches it's about 10% of the average worshiping congregation. If you don't have 10% that's kind of leaning in, it's going to be really hard. And that's why we require the peer learning before we do a consultation, because there's that chance to get excited, to build a bigger team, to start to pull together that 10% so that we can engage that. Because you're absolutely right, if you don't have a critical mass that's leaning in, it's going nowhere. That's partly why we will send folks to help bolster that. Right now, off the top of my head, I'm thinking of about 4. They actually all happen to be lay people who will go and visit churches and talk about their experience. We have a wonderful layperson from the Auburn United Methodist Church who she loves to come around. They're our pilot. They're the farthest along in the process. And she loves to come and share what their experience has been, because feels like the impact has been huge for their congregation. And both numerically and narratively it has been. But she talks about needing to get that group, that critical mass.
Just a continuation of that question. I'll phrase it in resources. Can you give us a summary of what you would think the resources be required in terms of man hours or woman hours and financial type for this whole process that we're going through?
If you were to go stem to stern from peer learning consultation on through, the raw cost of programming, and by the time you do some travel and pieces like that, you're probably talking $2,000 to $2,500 in terms of that. In terms of person hours, some of that's variable depending on people's reading speed or listening speed, because all the books that we use are also on audio format. Usually you're talking, for lay folks, 8 to 10 hours a month between the reading and some meetings to process everything. For the clergy person, probably closer to 10 to 12 hours a month.
That include traveling or?
Yeah. And that gets thrown off a little bit. That's why we try to use our camp and retreat centers for the meetings, because everybody in our conference, with the exception of 11 congregations, are inside of 2 hours one way to one of our retreat centers. Most are less than that. So I would guess from here to Sky Lake is probably 35 minutes, depending on the interchange.
Yes.
Or if you know the routes around it. There's not a lot of them because of the rivers, but so we try to make it so that you're not spending all your time in travel or in meetings, but we do want to have that time for engagement. There is an investment. We often talk about pastors and laity that are really engaging this need to look at how they realign some of their time. We are helping to train our superintendents to walk with congregations and say, the pastor that's always done this for this season may not do as many of those things because they're focusing here. And that's where I've sat and talked with SPRCs, but that's about it. 8 to 10 for the laity, 10 to 12 for the pastor for a month. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what my question is.
Okay, get started and we'll get there together.
Okay, because I'm thinking in terms of cultural change, and I guess how much resistance you experience with that, because every church has a culture of its own, every community has a culture of its own, so I guess I'm curious what you faced with that and how much it interferes with the process.
I wouldn't say that it interferes with the process at any point, because the whole process is about coming alongside that. We've seen the whole gamut between folks that have just said, this is who we are, this is what we do, and we're not willing to look at it. Chances are this is not the right process for them. Anytime we start to make changes, we get resistance. Let's just do this simple exercise. You all have been sitting here very nicely. Go ahead and cross your arms. I usually do this earlier. It gives you a chance to scowl at me earlier. So you get your arms crossed. Go ahead and practice a good scowl. Scowl at the leader up here talking away. But as you do that, most people, not everybody, but most people have one hand up and one hand under. Switch them. Right? Small change. It just doesn't feel right. And so when we start making bigger changes and we start changing something as important as the church, we'll get resistance. That's one of our factors we look at capacity. If there's a lot of resistance to change, we usually say there's some other work you need to do before we do a consultation. Sometimes we know that there's going to be that resistance and we go in as the lightning rod. That we'll push all the buttons of what need to be changed and everybody can get mad at us and still have a leadership team that can function and try to navigate through it. So we've hit everything. We try to be very mindful of what we ask to change. We let the congregation kind of determine how hard we push the accelerator. I've mentioned a couple times, we were just at Farmington United Methodist Church. They renamed their whole process. Instead of calling it hand to plow, they called it raise the bar. And so I just asked, how far do you want to raise it? And they gave me a long leeway. So we pressed pretty hard. Other places, we've realized we can't press that hard, but we can't leave it where it's at. Because we try to set up for success. And so we try to measure that and work appropriately.
Do your meetings that you have, your town meetings help? I would assume that that's a way to communicate with both concerns or stuff.
Yep. And it's a chance to hear where people are excited, where people are concerned. We've had a couple churches that have added, 3 is the minimum, they've added more.
That's what I wondered, if there's that flexibility in there, okay.
Yeah, essentially we want to say to the congregation, do what you need to do to make an informed decision about God's next faithful steps when you get to that charge conference.
Thank you.
Yep.
You talked about Auburn. Can you give us some examples of some of the things that they changed, just so we've got an idea?
We had them look at mission and vision. The way we said it was they had no clearly articulated and unified mission and vision. So we gave them the mission to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And then we did a visioning workshop that taught them how to discern their vision. We had them look at their intentional discipleship process. They were working on making disciples. They had people in Sunday school, they had people in classes, but there was no intention behind it. We had them look at the way they did their finances. They would tell you they no longer have a finance ministry. They have a generosity ministry. And that was one of the areas that we pushed them. So that's just a couple of the areas that we've pushed. We've pushed folks on inward versus outward, that their whole life was inward focused. When there was a community right around them that was desperately looking for the love and grace of Jesus Christ. Or just looking to be seen. So it's really pretty far and wide. Like I said, I do have last week's report with me. If you want to peek through that, that's fine. They posted it on their Facebook page, so I'm guessing it's pretty public information at that point. So it's hard to say exactly what we would come up with. I mentioned earlier a gentleman named Bob Farr. He just published a book that are the 10 most common prescriptions they've given. And you do find some reoccurring themes, but we treat each congregation as its own, because we don't know what we're going to find until we get here.
You mentioned earlier that over the course of the years, Methodist churches have had a lot of CAN programs, I would say, where you do this and you'll achieve this result. So, attended Saturday meetings, flip charts, and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
I'm a little older than most people, and I've experienced a lot of this. So I guess as a devil's advocate, I would say, what makes us think that this program is so much different than what we've experienced before? With a whole lot of verbiage and a whole lot of words without much concrete results. For us personally and as a church.
Yeah, that's a
Sorry for the question.
that's a very valid thing to look at, and actually it reminded me that I usually start off by asking how many people remember some of the hallmark pieces. I mean, there was Vision 2000 was a big denominational push, and then there was Quest for Quality. That was a big one, I think mid-'80s and that. And so you're right, there's been all these pieces that come through. I think one of the hallmark differences that we have is we're not saying if you just do these easy steps, it's all going to come out roses. We're saying if you pay attention to these principles, and we've set up a mechanism for you to look at them, and you start to build this cycle in the life of your church, that eventually it happens without us. I think a lot of times the programs we're creating a dependency. We're not trying to do that. We also have found that we've adapted a lot over the 3 years. Programs tend to not adapt. We've done some things that we've learned that's not helpful. Let's not do that anymore. I know it's a crazy thing, right? It's not working, so we stopped doing it. And we found some other things by accident that worked, so we started teaching that and saying, try that. But we also are always saying that it happens at the local church. And so there's no way I can sit in my office in Syracuse and say, you know, if EUMC would just do these 6 easy things, all their problems will be solved. There may be 6 easy things, but the only way we're going to know that is if we build a relationship and we spend the time one-on-one and learn the narrative of this place and learn what God has been up to for a long time and look at what the next faithful steps are and create a pretty unique setting just for here. That's, I think, one of our strengths. It's one of our limits because there's only so many places we can do that in a given year. And we're also willing to say, this may not be for everybody. Not everybody's ready to engage something like this. It's not going to rescue the church. I know I'm supposed to say, if you just do this, it'll be all right. Now we've got evidence that people that attended all the sessions, read all the books, and their church is in worse shape than when they started. Some of that may have to do with our process. Some of that may have to do with their process. But what we're saying is this is one of the tools that we're offering that we think, yeah, this has some fruit to it. We're not planning on it going away anytime soon, but it'll continue to change. So I think that's one of our differences. Is we're not saying this is the only way this will ever happen.
I see another difference because I'm a Stephen Covey facilitator, and we base that also on a process. We base that training on principles, and I think those principles are much of what you talked about. They're embedded. The Covey principles are there. The 7 habits of highly effective people are there. There's a difference that I'm feeling and that I've learned, and one of those is that it is very clear to me as a facilitator, a Stephen Covey facilitator, that we're making money for the Stephen Covey Foundation. You know, that's what we do. And it is business for them. I think the difference that I'm feeling and hearing here with you is that at some point, at any point, you walk away.
That's right.
You're not expecting us to continuously, for years on years on years, pay you.
Nope.
And so I see that as a really great difference, frankly.
Yeah, and that's at the heart of this, and the heart of reason that I am in the ministry that I'm in, is my heart beats, my passion is to come alongside the local church, which I truly believe is the hope of the world. And that's the benefit. You know, sure, I mean, transparency is good. I want to be able to support my family. And the United Methodist Church is very gracious with me in how that happens. At the end of the day, what matters to me most is what we're doing anything we can to help make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And for me, that's not just a canned tagline.
It isn't, I can tell it.
You know, that's what it's about for me. And you know, thanks for the nod that there's a lot on my schedule. Yeah. I got a group of people that want to hear about that. I'm there. I'll make it work. So thank you. Thank you.
Aaron, question. If the pastor is engaged and 10% of the congregation is engaged in the peer learning, is there something along the process that helps bring the other 90% along at any level?
Yeah, one of the pieces that we spend a lot more time in the lay sessions talking about than the clergy is that 10% become your best marketers, if you'll let me use that language. Because if you go and you're having this positive impact, we say, talk to the person in the pew next to you. Start telling the story. Churches that have had the most success, they'll take a bulletin board, and it'll be the Hand to Plow bulletin board, and it'll change all the time with what new is coming up. Giving time in the context of worship, not like 10 minutes, but 3 to 5 minutes. You know, we just had folks at Sky Lake this last Saturday. Here's what they're learning. And it starts to help folks come along in that process. The churches that have struggled more, it's been the pastor and a group, and they don't ever tell the story.
That's leadership.
You got it. Yeah.
You need followers.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if you start applying the principles that we teach, it starts to build on itself. But if you do nothing, you say, well, we're attending, everybody, we got the right ratios, we got the right numbers, but nothing's happening. First question I'm going to ask you, are you telling the stories? Well, no, not really. Okay. Try telling a few. Other questions? I used my education training. I counted to 14. I was taught. Once you ask a question, count to 14 before you move on. So, thank you so much for your time tonight. I greatly appreciate it. I live and breathe to spend time with folks in the local church, and I'm so privileged that you would welcome me in and let me step into this time. If I can be a resource to you in any way, shape, or form, whether it's through Hand to Plow or not. Hand to Plow is one of the things I do. I'm the director of Vital Congregations. It's a larger umbrella now. Any way that I can be helpful to you, please ask. I can't do everything. In fact, I can do very little, but I can do what I can and try to help you along. So thanks for the time, and if you'll let me, I'll close this in prayer. Let's pray together. Holy and loving God, we give you thanks for this time tonight. I give you thanks for those gathered in this space and those that have given their heart and their time to this gathering of people called the church, those here and those that have not been able to be here tonight. And Lord, we are so in awe of your grace and your love that you have for us. That without that grace and love, we would be lost. So we thank you for that, for your forgiveness, for your hope, for your dreaming. And we thank you for this glorious mystery called the church. May we be people who are willing to do whatever it takes to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. May we be people who would live the gospel in this place and to the very ends of the earth. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.